Something is growing out of an interstellar object right now, in real time, as you watch this. And the mathematics behind what it is doing have pushed NASA to call a classified emergency briefing at the Pentagon. We are not talking about a comet shedding dust in the usual chaotic way. We are talking about a perfectly symmetrical, 60-kilometer-wide metallic umbrella structure extruding itself from the nucleus of 3-2 Atlas with mechanical precision that carries a 1 in 4.7 billion probability of being natural. The James Webb Space Telescope captured it in high-resolution infrared. 3 independent observatories confirmed it. And hours ago, NASA's Near-Earth Object Observations Program logged the full event as having a 0.00001% chance of natural occurrence. Every number in this analysis is documented, cross-verified, and on record. What you are about to hear will fundamentally challenge your understanding of what is possible in deep space. 3-2 Atlas is the third confirmed interstellar object to enter our solar system, following the well-documented cases of Oumuamua and Borisov. It was first cataloged on January 14, 2026, initially classified as a rogue comet on a direct inbound trajectory. But from the very first observations, 2 things separated it from every other interstellar object on record. Its trajectory was unusually straight, more like a guided approach than a gravitationally curved drift, and its surface albedo, the measure of how much light it reflects, was abnormally high. Most comets are dark. They absorb light and reflect very little back. 3-2 Atlas was gleaming with a metallic brightness from the moment it entered our instrument's range. That reflectivity alone made it a priority observation target. What the telescopes found when they looked closer is what changed everything. On April 12, 2026, JWST's NIRCam instrument detected a sudden, localized thermal spike on the object's leading edge. A perfectly circular bulge had begun forming at the apex of the nucleus. Not a random jet of outgassing material spreading in multiple directions, but a concentrated, single-vector extrusion pushing outward along one precise axis. ESA's Gaia spacecraft independently verified the geometric distortion through astrometric mapping. The ALMA-AREMA array in Chile cross-referenced the emission spectra. 3 separate observatories, using 3 entirely different measurement approaches, reached the same conclusion. 3-2 Atlas was not shedding mass chaotically. It was deliberately pushing matter outward in a controlled column. The data confirmed that exactly 33 billion tons of material had shifted outward along that single vector in under 48 hours. To appreciate what that figure represents physically, consider the forces involved. Moving 33 billion tons of mass through a zero-gravity vacuum in under 2 days along a single precise axis without fracturing the source object requires internal pressure that far exceeds anything the structural limits of a natural ice and rock comet body could withstand. Think of it as a piston driving outward from the core of a mountain-sized object, except the mountain does not crack, and the piston moves at a mathematically constant, unvarying rate. That was anomaly number 1. On April 16th, the extruded column stopped growing at exactly 2.4 kilometers in length. The tip then began spreading outward radially, flattening, widening, taking shape. By April 18th, that spreading tip had curved backward into a flawless parabolic dome, an umbrella canopy shielding the main cometary body from direct solar exposure. Today, analysts are tracking exactly 12 documented anomalies tied to this single morphological transformation. The canopy is currently 60 kilometers wide. It is expanding at a mathematically constant rate of exactly 12.4 meters per second. No acceleration, no deceleration, no variation. And the thermal signature across its entire surface is uniform to within 0.03 degrees Kelvin. A natural sublimation event does not have speed control. Melting ice does not expand at a fixed rate. And it certainly does not maintain a uniform thermal distribution across 60 kilometers of surface area in the direct path of solar wind. Something else is at work here. The spectroscopy data returned by LMA's Band 7 receivers confirmed what the thermal readings had already implied. The material forming this canopy is not ordinary cometary ice or loose silicate dust. The instruments detected metallic signatures throughout the cap structure, elements that should not exist in stable form at the temperature regime present in that region of space, yet they are there, woven into a lattice-like arrangement that provides the entire canopy with structural support. The probability of heavy metallic elements spontaneously arranging into a load-bearing lattice during a standard cometary outgassing event is less than 0.17%. Even the most conservative astrophysicists at Harvard and MIT have acknowledged publicly that the tensile strength required to keep a 60-kilometer-wide umbrella from fracturing at its connection point to the stem exceeds anything known natural silicate compositions can deliver. To understand why that matters, consider the mechanical forces acting on this structure. The solar wind, a continuous stream of charged particles flowing outward from the sun at hundreds of kilometers per second, strikes every surface in the inner solar system with measurable pressure. A 60-kilometer canopy deployed directly into that stream, attached to a central stem, experiences enormous bending and shear forces at the connection point. For context, this is the equivalent of holding an umbrella made of compacted snow directly into the exhaust blast of a jet engine and having it not only hold its shape, but continue expanding at a perfectly controlled rate. The ALMA Band 7 data shows zero fragmentation in the canopy structure. It is intact, it is holding, and it is still growing. Then on April 19, 2026, at exactly 1422 UTC, a new and deeply troubling data point arrived from NASA's Deep Space Network antenna DSS-43. The object's core temperature had dropped, suddenly, sharply, and dramatically. This was not a gradual cooling consistent with reduced solar exposure. The central stem connecting the umbrella cap to the cometary nucleus had plummeted to 40 degrees Kelvin, while the outer canopy surface simultaneously registered over 400 degrees Kelvin from direct solar bombardment. The umbrella was absorbing extreme heat on its exterior face, while the connection point to the nucleus was becoming colder than the surrounding void of deep space. That inverts one of the most foundational principles in physics. Heat flows from regions of higher temperature to regions of lower temperature. That is the second law of thermodynamics. Not a model, not an approximation, but an observed law that is held without exception across every experiment, every observation, and every natural environment ever studied. What 3-2 Atlas is doing violates it. The metallic lattice within the canopy is not conducting heat inward toward the nucleus the way every known material does. It is actively redirecting thermal energy away from the stem, operating as a thermal inverter in a vacuum environment where no mechanism for such a process exists in any current physical model. The analogy that best captures this: imagine standing in the desert heat holding a large metal umbrella. Instead of the metal handle warming up from the heat conducted through the umbrella, it begins rapidly freezing in your hand. That is precisely the thermal behavior the instruments recorded at a cosmic scale. And the combined probability of this event, a comet spontaneously forming a geometrically perfect 60-kilometer canopy at 1 in 4.7 billion odds, simultaneously exhibiting reverse thermal conductivity at less than 0.001% probability, produces a combined figure so infinitesimally small it has no meaningful natural interpretation. In 4 million years of theoretical cometary observation history, this specific combination of structural geometry and thermodynamic defiance has never been recorded once. Dr. Avi Loeb at Harvard, who has spent decades rigorously analyzing interstellar anomalies, stated directly that the thermodynamic telemetry from this object looks entirely artificial. ESA took emergency action to realign the Gaia spacecraft for uninterrupted continuous monitoring. These are not reactions to a melting snowball. They are responses to something operating by rules that our current understanding of physics cannot account for. By the time April 19th's thermal inversion data had been verified across 3 independent instruments, the scientific community was already operating at a level of urgency that rarely accompanies cometary observation. But the event that shifted this from an extraordinary astrophysical anomaly into something requiring Pentagon-level classified briefings had not yet occurred. That came on April 20th, 2026, at exactly 9:15 UTC, and it arrived simultaneously from 2 entirely separate instrument arrays with no coordination between them. the ALMA-Array in Chile and NASA's Deep Space Network detected at the same moment and through different measurement methods that the 60-kilometer metallic canopy had begun functioning as a parabolic reflector. The geometry of the umbrella structure, that precise, mathematically perfect parabolic curve that had formed by April 18th, was not incidental to its shape. A parabolic surface has one specific and well-understood electromagnetic property. It focuses incoming signals to a single point, and it amplifies outgoing signals from that point into a coherent directed beam. Every satellite dish on Earth operates on exactly that principle. The canopy of 3-2 Atlas had produced, through whatever process formed it, a geometrically perfect parabolic reflector 60 kilometers in diameter. And at 9:15 UTC, the central stem, the exact connection point between the canopy and the cometary nucleus, emitted a highly coherent, narrowband electromagnetic pulse directly into the curved inner surface of that canopy. The canopy focused it. It amplified the signal by a factor of 10,000, and it beamed it outward into deep space as a tight, directed transmission. 3 independent observatories confirmed this sequence. The energy signature of that pulse matched nothing in any existing astrophysical catalog. It was not a known natural emission frequency. It was not consistent with solar plasma interaction. It was narrowband, meaning it carried a specific, constrained frequency rather than the broad spectrum of energy that natural electromagnetic events produce. A rock does not build a focused radio dish. A frozen ball of ice and compressed dust does not generate a coherent narrowband pulse, focus it through a parabolic reflector, and beam it into deep space with directed precision. The physical sequence of what happened: nucleus generates signal, signal travels up the stem, canopy focuses and amplifies, directed beam exits, describes a functional communication antenna, not a natural emission, a transmission system. The distinction between those two things is the most consequential line in the history of astronomical observation, and the data from April 20th places 3-2 Atlas firmly on one side of it. Within 6 hours of that pulse being confirmed, NASA and ESA initiated a Level 1 secure data protocol. The raw transmission feeds from both JWST and Hubble's Wide Field Camera 3 were encrypted and removed from public access. In 50 years of modern astrophysics, a data restriction at that level applied to a cometary object has happened an extraordinarily small number of times. The agencies responsible for the most powerful space observation instruments humanity has ever built decided, within hours of confirming a directed electromagnetic transmission from an interstellar object, that the incoming data should no longer be publicly accessible. The weight of that institutional decision is its own form of confirmation. What remained accessible in the pre-restriction data record continued to raise questions that the classified briefings were apparently convened specifically to address. The narrowband pulse was not a single random burst. Spectroscopy and radio frequency analysis indicated that the signal pattern carried non-random mathematical structure, information density characteristics that distinguished it from noise and from known natural emission types. The precise content of that structure and the specific direction the amplified beam was pointed when it left the canopy are the two questions that every classified NASA and ESA session since April 20th has carefully avoided addressing in any public capacity. Those two unanswered questions define the boundary between what we know and what determines everything about what comes next. Let us establish, with precision, the complete documented record of what has been confirmed through triple-verified, independently cross-referenced observation before engaging with what it means. First, 3-2 Atlas extruded a perfectly symmetrical metallic umbrella structure from its nucleus, 60 kilometers wide, growing at a mathematically constant 12.4 meters per second, with a thermal uniformity across its surface of 0.03 degrees Kelvin. Second, the combined statistical probability of that geometric precision and the simultaneous reverse thermal conductivity is approximately 1 in 14.7 billion. Third, NASA, ESA, and the ALMA array independently confirmed both the structural integrity of the canopy and the thermal inversion behavior at the stem. Fourth, on April 20th at 9:15 UTC, All three independently confirmed that the canopy is functioning as an active parabolic reflector, amplifying a directed narrowband electromagnetic pulse from the nucleus by a factor of 10,000 and beaming it outward into deep space. These are not theoretical positions. They are empirical observations documented across the world's most advanced measurement arrays, cross-referenced through entirely different methodologies, and consistent across all sources. The question that remains, the one that the Level 1 data quarantine has ensured cannot be answered through public scientific channels, is the content and direction of the transmission. What mathematical information is encoded in that narrowband pulse before the canopy amplifies it? And where, precisely, is the resulting beam pointed? Those two pieces of information together would define whether this is a beacon, a relay station, or a targeted communication directed at a specific location in the cosmos. The absence of those answers in the public record, in the context of everything else that has been confirmed, is itself a statement about how the institutions with access to the classified feed have assessed what they are seeing. The scenario framework within which scientists are working privately breaks into three distinct possibilities. The first is that this is a hyper-rare natural phenomenon, that the universe contains physical and chemical processes capable of producing perfect parabolic geometry, reverse thermal conductivity, and narrowband electromagnetic transmission through mechanisms that no current model of astrophysics, thermodynamics, or electromagnetic theory accounts for. If that is true, then the foundational frameworks of multiple scientific disciplines require simultaneous comprehensive revision. The second possibility is that this is ancient dormant technology, a probe or device constructed by a civilization that no longer exists, triggered into activity by the thermal proximity of our sun as 3-2 Atlas fell inward through the solar system. If that is true, extraterrestrial technology is not a distant theoretical concept. It is physically present in our solar system, it is operational, and it has just transmitted something into deep space. The third possibility is that none of those words, ancient or dormant, apply. If the transmission system deployed not as a passive response to solar heating, but as a deliberate, timed action, and if the beam is directed at a specific destination, then this object is not a relic. It is active, it is communicating, and whatever it is communicating with may receive that signal and respond. None of those three frameworks offers a comfortable middle position. The data does not permit one. Every instrument pointed at 3-2 Atlas is returning readings that place it outside the boundary of every natural classification system developed across decades of cometary science. And the object is still moving, still crossing the inner solar system at 44 kilometers per second, still expanding its canopy, still transmitting. In exactly 72 hours, it will have critical additional data available regarding the secondary signal bounce, the next phase of whatever process began on April 12th. The question is not whether more data is coming. It is whether the institutions receiving that data will allow any of it to reach the public record. The physical scale of what 3-2 Atlas has constructed deserves direct confrontation, because the numbers become abstract at this magnitude, and abstraction allows the full weight of the situation to slip past without registering properly. The canopy is 60 kilometers wide. For context, that is larger than many small countries. It is wider than the distance from the center of London to its outer suburbs. It formed from the nucleus of an interstellar object in roughly 6 days, extruding, shaping, curving into a parabolic dome, and hardening into a metallic lattice structure with tensile properties that exceed any known natural silicate composition. It did this while traveling at 44 kilometers per second through a vacuum against the continuous pressure of the solar wind, without fracturing at any point along the stem connecting it to the nucleus. The thermal management this structure is performing is equally stark when expressed in concrete terms. The outer face of the canopy is absorbing over 400 degrees Kelvin of solar bombardment. The stem connection to the nucleus has cooled to 40 degrees Kelvin, colder than the ambient temperature of the surrounding space environment. That 360-degree differential, maintained stably across a metallic structure in direct solar exposure, means that the canopy is not simply blocking heat from reaching the nucleus. It is actively removing thermal energy from the connection point and the nucleus itself, functioning as a refrigeration system operating in conditions where no refrigeration mechanism should be achievable. This is not passive shielding. This is active thermal management of a precision that requires a closed-loop feedback system, something monitoring temperatures, measuring outcomes, and adjusting the thermal transfer process to maintain specific target temperatures at specific locations within the structure. Consider that alongside the narrowband pulse, a closed-loop thermal management system, a directed electromagnetic transmission amplified by a factor of 10,000 through a geometrically perfect parabolic antenna, a deployment sequence that proceeded in distinct, controlled stages: column extrusion, cap formation, parabolic curvature, thermal inversion, signal emission, each stage completing before the next began over a period of 8 days. This is not a sequence of random events that happen to resemble engineering. This is a sequence that, if performed by any human-built system, would be described straightforwardly as a deployment protocol, an automated sequence of actions executed in order to bring a system from a dormant state to an operational one. The ESA's emergency reorientation of the Gaia spacecraft to maintain uninterrupted observation, combined with NASA's DSS 4-3 continuous tracking commitment and the ALMA array's dedicated monitoring allocation, represents an extraordinary concentration of humanity's observational resources on a single object. These are instruments with scheduled observation programs, research commitments, and allocation queues that extend months into the future. Redirecting them requires institutional authorization at levels that reflect genuine urgency. Not scientific curiosity, but the kind of assessed significance that prompts emergency resource reallocation. The agencies involved do not publicly explain the full reasoning behind those decisions. The decisions themselves communicate what the public statements do not. Dr. Avi Loeb's public statement, that the thermodynamic telemetry looks entirely artificial, carries a specific weight that should not be underestimated. Loeb is not a sensationalist. He is a careful, methodologically rigorous researcher who has spent years being specifically cautious about claims regarding interstellar anomalies. When that researcher, examining the thermal data from 3-2 Atlas, chooses the word artificial in a public context, it reflects a threshold of observational clarity that his professional standards would not permit him to cross lightly. The thermodynamic behavior of this object passed that threshold, and the electromagnetic pulse that followed passed whatever threshold remained for the institutions that initiated the Level 1 data quarantine within hours of its confirmation. One question sits at the center of everything documented about 3-2 Atlas, and it is the question that every closed-door briefing at NASA, at ESA, at the Pentagon has been convened specifically to address without resolution reaching the public record. What intelligence, what mechanism, what force or principle of physics encoded complex, non-random mathematical information into a narrowband electromagnetic pulse, directed it through a 60-kilometer parabolic antenna constructed from interstellar material, and aimed the resulting beam at a specific destination in the cosmos? Because the answer to that question does not allow for a comfortable range of interpretations. It resolves into one of three realities, and each one of them permanently alters the framework within which humanity understands its situation in the universe. If this is a natural phenomenon, then the universe contains self-organizing processes so sophisticated, so geometrically precise, so thermodynamically controlled, so electromagnetically structured, that they are operationally indistinguishable from engineering. That conclusion would require the immediate and comprehensive rewriting of astrophysics, thermodynamics, materials, science, and electromagnetic theory simultaneously. Every model, every prediction, every textbook built on the assumption that natural processes in a vacuum produce chaotic, entropic, uncontrolled outputs would require replacement. The foundational assumption of modern science, that the difference between natural and engineered is reliably detectable, would need to be abandoned. If this is ancient dormant technology, then the second conclusion follows directly. Extraterrestrial civilization existed, constructed something of sufficient durability to survive interstellar travel across an unknown distance over an unknown time span, and that object is now operational inside our solar system, having been triggered by proximity to our sun. the implications for the question of whether humanity is alone in the universe would be resolved, not by a radio signal from a distant star, but by physical machinery functioning in our own cosmic backyard. And if the transmission was not a passive awakening response, but a deliberate, timed action, if 3-2 Atlas did not merely really react to solar heat, but executed a pre-programmed deployment sequence at a specific point in its trajectory through our solar system, then the word dormant does not apply. Something sent this object here. Something programmed it to deploy its antenna at this specific location, at this specific time, and transmit in a specific direction. That scenario places an active, purposeful intelligence somewhere in the cosmos that knows our solar system, knows its geometry, and chose this moment and this trajectory for a reason that the classified briefings have apparently not produced a satisfying public answer to. There is no scenario that allows for indifference. One of these three possibilities is the current state of reality, and the data from 3-2 Atlas has eliminated the comfortable alternative of ignorance. Right now, as this analysis concludes, JWST and the ALMA array remain pointed at 3-2 Atlas. The object continues crossing the inner solar system at 44 kilometers per second. In 72 hours, secondary signal bounce data will be available to the instruments still authorized to receive and transmit it publicly. The encrypted feeds from JWST and Hubble remain restricted. The canopy continues expanding. The thermal inversion holds. The transmission continues. Whatever this object is, a cosmic accident that breaks physics, an ancient machine executing its final programmed task, or an active probe from something that knows we are here, it is present, it is functioning, and the scientific institutions of our civilization are watching it in classified silence while the clock runs forward. If this is the kind of rigorous, data-driven analysis that cuts through the noise and gets to what the instruments actually recorded, subscribe right now, turn on notifications, and stay close. In 72 hours, when that secondary signal data arrives, you need to be here for what it reveals. This story is not finished. It is accelerating.